Hey there and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to learn all about President Abraham Lincoln, the 16th President of the United States. So if you're ready to get them brain cows milked, then let's get to it. Okay, before we jump into the juicy stuff, let's start with a little bit of background information. Abraham Lincoln was born on February 12, 1809, in a log cabin in Kentucky. His father was a farmer and a former hatter, and his mother was a homemaker. Now, despite the fact that his family wasn't rich, he was actually mostly self-educated and taught himself how to read and write by using books that were checked out from a library. He also studied law by reading books on the subject. That is a huge go-getter move right there. After studying law, he began working as a lawyer and eventually became the youngest member of the Illinois legislature at age 23. As a young politician, he started off as a member of the Whig Party, which was one of the two dominant parties during this time period, along with the Democratic Party. But when the Whig Party began to fall apart, he joined the newly formed Republican Party. The Republican Party was a new kid on the block, so to speak, and was gaining popularity because it opposed the expansion of slavery into new territories. This was important because during this time period, there was a lot of debate over whether or not slavery should be allowed to spread to the lands acquired in the Louisiana Purchase and the Oregon Territory. Anyway, Lincoln was elected to the House of Representatives in 1846. But don't worry, he didn't stay there for too long because in 1860, he was elected as the 16th President of the United States. All right, now that we got that housekeeping out of the way, let's talk about why President Lincoln was such a big deal. First of all, he was the first president from a non-slave state, and second, he was the first president to be from outside of the two dominant parties. In other words, he was the first president who was not a Democrat or a Whig. Lincoln's election was a major shift in American politics. As I mentioned earlier, he was running on an anti-slavery platform, which meant that he opposed the expansion of slavery into new territories. This was a controversial issue at the time, and it caused a lot of tension between the North and the South. The southern states relied heavily on slave labor, and they were worried that if slavery was not allowed to spread to new territories, then the power of the South would eventually diminish. When Lincoln won the election, the southern states saw this as a threat to their way of life and decided to secede from the Union. This led to the beginning of the Civil War. Now, the Civil War was a really complicated conflict with lots of causes and lots of effects. But one of the most important things to understand about the war is that it was fought over the issue of slavery. Lincoln was against slavery on moral grounds, and he believed that it was wrong to allow the institution to continue. In his famous Gettysburg Address, he said that the nation was founded on the idea that all men are created equal, and he believed that this equality was incompatible with the existence of slavery. Lincoln also believed that the Union was more important than the Constitution. In other words, he thought that if the South tried to break away, it wouldn't be a good idea. To stop him, the Constitution did not specifically give the federal government the power to prevent secession, but Lincoln believed that it was his duty as president to preserve the Union. He said that if the country could be destroyed because some people wanted it destroyed, then it wasn't worth preserving. Ultimately, Lincoln was successful in preserving the Union and ending slavery, but it came at a high cost. The Civil War was one of the deadliest conflicts in American history, with an estimated 620,000 soldiers dying. Despite the cost, Lincoln is often remembered as one of the greatest presidents in American history. He is known for his leadership during the Civil War, his commitment to human rights, and his ability to articulate complex issues in simple terms. For example, in his second inaugural address, he said that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from this earth. That's a pretty famous line. Okay, now that we talked about what he accomplished, let's talk about what kind of guy he was. First of all, he was a very religious man, and he believed that God had a plan for him and the country. He was also a very humble man, and he knew that he didn't have all the answers. For example, in his first inaugural address, he said that he was not at all confident that I shall be able to do all that will be expected of me. He also said that he was not trying to be a dictator and that he would not try to abolish slavery where it already existed. Instead, he said that he would only try to prevent its expansion into new territories. Finally, he was a very honest man, and he was known for his integrity and his sense of justice. Okay, now let's talk about why Lincoln is important for the AP government curriculum. First of all, he is important because he was the president during the Civil War. This was a major turning point in American history, and it led to the abolition of slavery and the preservation of the Union. Second, he is important because he helped to shape the role of the president. Before Lincoln, presidents were generally seen as having a limited role in the federal government. However, Lincoln's actions during the Civil War greatly expanded the power of the presidency. He took actions that many people believed were unconstitutional, such as suspending habeas corpus and appointing people to key positions without Senate confirmation. However, he justified these actions as being necessary to preserve the Union. This set a precedent for future presidents to follow, and it helped to establish the United States as a strong centralized government. Finally, he is important because he helped to define the relationship between the federal government and the states. Before the Civil War, there was a lot of debate over the balance of power between the federal government and the states. The states had a lot of autonomy, and they were able to make their own laws on a variety of issues. However, Lincoln's actions during the Civil War greatly increased the power of the federal government. He asserted the authority of the federal government over the states, and he established the supremacy of the national government. Okay, now I want to share with you a couple of common misconceptions about Lincoln. First of all, some people believe that Lincoln was opposed to all forms of slavery, but that's not quite true. When he first entered politics, he supported the spread of slavery into new territories. However, he later came to oppose it, as he learned more about the evils of slavery. Second, some people believe that Lincoln was a strict constructionist, but that's also not true. Strict constructionists believe that the Constitution should be interpreted literally, and that judges should only uphold laws that have a clear constitutional basis. However, Lincoln believed that the Constitution should be interpreted in light of changing circumstances, and that judges should be able to strike down laws that were inconsistent with the spirit of the Constitution. Okay, now let's finish up with a few more facts about President Lincoln. Number 1, he was the first president to live in the White House. Although the White House had been completed in 1800, no president had lived there yet because it had not been deemed safe enough to live there. However, Lincoln's wife, Mary Todd, insisted that the family move into the White House, and they officially moved in on March 1861. Number 2, he was the first president to be assassinated. He was shot by John Wilkes Booth on April 14, 1865, while attending a play at Ford's Theater. He died the next morning. And number 3, he was the first president to be honored with a national holiday. Lincoln's birthday was celebrated as a legal holiday in Illinois in 1863, and it was made a federal holiday in 1937. Okay, that's what you need to know about President Abraham Lincoln. If you want even more review material, click right over here and grab a view packet. And if you want me to keep making these videos, then by all means subscribe. I'm out.